Hello everybody, how are you doing? I hope you are well. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season. My name is Shaun and I'm a YouTuber from Edinburgh in Scotland. It's great to see you all. It has been a little bit of a while since I've done one of these sit down and talk videos. But you know what, we're in lockdown in Scotland until probably the end of January, meaning we can't really do much at all. Everything's shut and, well, you know what? We're going to try to make the most of it anyway, so I thought I would do a couple of sit-down videos because there's a couple of topics I've been wanting to speak about for a while. Today I want to talk about the Scots language because it's something that's quite important to Scotland culturally, and it's something that's been making a bit of a revival and a comeback in the forefront of everyone's mind. So in Scotland we speak a number of different dialects and languages, really. So first of all, the main language that most people speak and that most people know is English, obviously, and there's also Gaelic as well. Gaelic, unfortunately, is spoken by a very tiny percentage of the population in Scotland, maybe 1 or 2%, and most of those people live in very small, isolated communities. It doesn't make it any less valid or culturally important, but most people simply don't speak Gaelic or know any words of it at all. You know, I get a lot of people, especially from the States and Canada, who will send me a message in Gaelic, and I'm thinking, I don't even know what a single word of this means. Because I think people from around the world assume that we speak Gaelic. Everyone speaks Gaelic here, which we really don't. Which is a shame, but that's the way it is, alright? So there is Gaelic, it is important culturally, and it's very, very important to the communities who speak it, and certain islands in the west coast especially. But there's also Scots. Scots is what most people assume is really a dialect, or even worse, they'll call it a slang. And I myself have been guilty of this in the past as well. And this is why I wanted to do today's video. And I'm going to get into that in a little second and tell you about some really interesting words, that some of which I didn't even know about. And some of which are more common. But first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for being here. It's great to see you all. If you're new to my channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, put your comments down below. I would love to know your thoughts as always. So Scots, for me, is a funny one, right? Because before, you know, my family, they mostly don't speak Scots whatsoever. So when I was growing up and as a very, very young child, I spoke, you know, perfect English pretty much. But then when I started going to school, you know, primary school and high school, I started to pick up the language that everybody was speaking around me, all my friends, which was Scots. And I picked up very quickly, started taking in all the words that we would use. And I got, pretty much as I went throughout growing up, that got hit out of me. Not literally hit out of me, but it got, I was told under no uncertain terms that I wasn't to speak like that. I was to speak proper English, lest I would never have a chance of securing a career in the future. Which, to be honest with you, is actually true. You know, if you go for job interviews, you want to be speaking perfect English. As simple as that, depending on what area you work in, but for most jobs, especially if it's anything to do with international, you can't go in speaking Scots in a job interview. You might remember, for example, in Train Spotting, the moment where Spud went for his job interview.
I just put down to Royal Edinburgh College to help get the job. There's too much discrimination in this town, man. People get all hung up on details, like which school did I go to, how many O grades did I get? Could be like 6, could be none. It's not important.
Partly he didn't get that job because he was speaking like somebody who was on drugs, which he obviously was, but also, you know, by the fact that he was speaking Scots, the language made him seem very common and very rough. That is a reality of the matter, right? But that is a bit of a misconception, and it is funny because like I said, I grew up with people all around me, you know, teachers, family members as well, saying, you know, some of the things I was saying was actually slang. And I think the thing is, a lot of people in Scotland, especially in Edinburgh, do consider Scots as a dialect at best, but slang, really. And it is a funny one, and something I've never really been able to put my finger on. You know, the difference between a language and a dialect is actually, as it turns out, very, very difficult to really pin down. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a little second, but there's some people actually out there today on Twitter and Facebook and all the other social medias who are trying to make a revival of this. Young Scottish people, which is really amazing to see, right? There's one girl called Len who's on Twitter, and she does like a Scots word of the day, which has been a very popular series. People love to see it. She also unfortunately gets a lot of abuse from people in Scotland who reject her use of Scots as a language and say it is like a pretend language and that basically she shouldn't speak it, which is very ignorant and sad, really. But it just kind of show you the state of affairs, you know, just a girl who's out there talking Scots words, you know, giving a Scots word of the day in her content, and she's getting a lot of abuse by Scottish people who don't want to see it. Bizarre. But there's obviously a lot of Scottish people who do support it and who do want to bring it back. Like I said, Len's doing a great job on Twitter. Another girl who actually sings in Scots. Iona Fife, who actually recently did a cover of In the Bleak Midwinter in Scots, which is incredible. I'll put all the links down to these people down below so you can check. And then there's people like Alistair Heather, who's another young Scot, who actually recently did a documentary all about the Scots language. And its revival among young people. And it's really, really amazing to see all that. And I've done a number of videos, years ago now on my channel, way, way back, about this topic and, almost touching on it as if it was like a slang language I was speaking, which was wrong and it was ignorant. But the thing is, it goes back towards Scotland and what its perception of itself is out there in the world. How do we see ourselves? And we have this kind of self-consciousness of how we are. Right? We see ourselves as speaking Scots, then we see ourselves as inferior. So, for example, like I mentioned earlier, we go for job interviews, we can't be seen to use Scots words, no danger. But like I said, that's why it's so important that we've got these young people who are going forward and saying, no, actually, I want to own this as a language, because you don't have to go back that far in history. Not too far back. Rabbie Burns, back in those days, it was all the rage. Scots as a language was seen as powerful, it was seen as sophisticated, it was seen as art. But far from just being a bit of poetry romance, it was actually a language that's how everybody spoke, right? And the fact of the matter is, if you, especially in working class Scotland, where I grew up, places like that, that's how people speak. And we're taught when we get to school that actually that's wrong. And I want to say today in this video that actually that is backwards thinking, because are we speaking a language? Or are we speaking a dialect? And you know what? There's a lot of people out there, intelligent people who haven't really got skin in the game, but intelligent people who know what they're talking about, who would actually push the conversation towards Scots actually being a language. But a couple of weeks ago, as this discussion online on Twitter, really intensified about Scots and whether it's a language, really kind of based around Len and her post and all the kind of people who are being negative about it. There was a man called Hamish Chalmers, who is a professor of linguistics, a professor of applied linguistics at the University of Oxford. This is a very, very credible person who did a massive thread, and again, I'm going to link to that down below in the comments, about Scots and whether or not it's a language. And throughout all the things that he said on that thread, it very much leans towards Scots actually being a language based on how you would conceive a language being, right? Now, he didn't give a definitive answer to say definitely 100% Scots is a language, but what he said made a lot of sense. And basically, for all the reasons that you would say English is a language or Gaelic's a language, if you take those reasons for them being language or considered being languages into consideration, you'd have to also then say Scots should be considered as a language. So that's very fascinating, because then it brings a new dimension into people who are brought up in Scotland and maybe working class communities and maybe have a lot of self-esteem issues and feel self-conscious of the fact that they're from where they're from, right? But actually, if you start telling those people, you should be proud of the language you speak because it's a language, it's not to be looked down on anyone, it is sophisticated and it is important to your culture. If you start bringing that into the conversation, then you start empowering people, basically. That is the crux of the matter, right? So anyway, to get back to the crux of today's video and what I'm talking about here, I wanted to talk about, some of the more common Scots words that we use on a day-to-day basis here in Scotland when we're talking among ourselves. So it's really funny, right? When I'm at home and I'm speaking to my wife, who's obviously from Brazil, I don't, speak Scots whatsoever. Or also in my day job, when I'm speaking from people from mostly around the world, but mostly from London, I would never ever consider using Scots words because people simply wouldn't understand what I was saying. So when I speak at home or with my colleagues or whatever, I'm speaking perfect English. But then if I speak to some of my friends who I grew up with in Scotland on the phone or whatever, I'll immediately switch to Scots, and my wife will say, I can't understand a word you just said to your friend on the phone. It's really funny, and it's something that just like a switch in your head. A switch in my head rather, that happens automatically. Anyway, I want to get into some of the more common words that we use in Scotland on a day-to-day basis, right? Starting with I. So we'll say I, that means basically yes, right? But actually you can switch that around. If you say I right to someone, or I right then, basically that is a sarcastic way to say that you don't believe what they're saying, all right? So I means yes, but I can also mean if you say I right then, it means that you don't believe the person. Blether. Blether basically means to have a bit of a chat with someone, a bit of a gossip. Alright? Bra is a word that basically means good, something is good. If something is good or good looking, you would say bra. This one I'm going to say Dinnae, alright? That's an interesting one because there's different people who say it slightly differently, and it's also changed throughout the ages. So right now, most people in Scotland would say Dinnae, like Dinnae do that, which means don't do that, right? Don't. Dinnae means don't. So that's how we would say it today, but like if you look way back in history, I think some people might have said dinner. And actually there might be regions in Scotland today that even say dinner, but most people would say Dinnae today. Driech, if it's Driech, it means the weather is basically wet, horrible, rainy, windy, and all the rest of it. A typical day in Scotland, you could say, is Driech. Ken. Ken means to know. If you ken something, you know. Or if you didn't ken something, you don't know something. I'm going to tell you a very Edinburgh Scots word, right? And it's funny, but that when this argument goes back and forward about language or not, a lot of these words actually relate to something in English, and that is one of the arguments people say, well, it can't be a language then because you're just using an English word, but you're putting a bit of an accent on it, right? So, Radge, R-A-D-G-E, Radge, basically means someone is crazy. Here in Edinburgh in particular, this is a word that we use in Edinburgh, so very, very local to Edinburgh, right? We'll say someone is a Radge, it means they're a bit crazy. But if you look in the English language dictionary, a Radge literally means a pregnant fish. Is there a connection there? I don't know, right? But it is interesting nonetheless. Scrang. Scrang basically means food. But you can use it in different forms as well. So you can get some scran, which means you're going to get some food. Another one that kind of links back to the English, right? So head, the word head for your head, we would say heed. I mean, it's very, very similar, but it has a slight different tonation on it. Heed. Alright, and different spelling as well. These are some of the more common words that we will use on a day-to-day basis here in Scotland. Like I said, there's very different variations depending on which part of Scotland you're in. Here in Edinburgh, we say things one particular way, and we even have our own words for a lot of different things, like Radge, that they don't use elsewhere. And then if you go to Glasgow, it's an entirely different ballgame. They speak very differently there in Glasgow. Much, much different from how we would speak here. And again, that's another thing that people use to kind of discredit Scots as being a language, right? Because it is so different between east and west, north and south of Scotland. But like the professor of linguistics at Oxford said in his thread, that's not necessarily a bearing. Because, there's other languages out there. Let's just take Spanish and Portuguese, for example. I actually speak Portuguese because my wife's from Brazil. They are so similar, especially if you see them written down. And in fact, if you can understand Portuguese, if you can speak Portuguese, you can understand Spanish. They're very, very similar, all right? That's not to say you could speak both unless you actually trained to do Spanish, but you can see the similarities very, very clearly if you see those two languages next to each other. So that is not an excuse to say Scots isn't a language just because it, borrows from English a lot of the time. And like I said to you, this language thing, especially with Scots, it changes so much throughout the ages. So I mentioned Robbie Burns because he was the famous poet who really kind of popularised Scots to the world way back in the day, right? But how he spoke and wrote Scots, we would not speak like that or write like that today, really. I mean, some of the words we would use, yes, but the way he spoke Scots is almost unintelligible to how we would speak today. And I find that really fascinating how modern Scots has evolved from what it was in the days of Robbie Burns. Anyway, I want to take you through some words that are a bit more less common and a bit more interesting. A lot of these words I've never actually heard of before. I never seen. I actually saw this in an article in the Scotsman. Again, to put the link down below to some more unusual and funny sounding words in Scots. I thought it'd be interesting to add this in, alright? Ferntickle means to be touched by angels, often associated with Scots of a fairer complexion, especially redheads. That makes me Ferntickle. Haggernash means scraps of meat. Snouk means like to sniff around like a dog. And I'm not sure why you would do something like that. I don't know. Maybe if you smell something a bit dodgy, you're having a snouk. Moggang is an old Scots word that means a sock or a stocking. Pillarachie. Again, never heard of this one, right? But apparently it means when there's a bit of a disturbance. Illwillie. This sounds a bit dodgy, right? But apparently it means when there's an animal of a bad nature or a grumpy or mean nature. Hiedidpeer means of two people of equal stature and size. Ramstoorie. Again, another one I've never ever heard in my life. But apparently that means someone who's rough and ready. So it has been a while since I've talked about any of this type of thing on my channel. And like I said, now because we're in lockdown, it gives me a perfect opportunity to do so. And it's a subject that a lot of people are fascinated in and want to know more about. I did talk about this in some of my videos way back when. It's definitely something worth exploring and, really thinking about the deep psychological things of why people need to be proud of the fact that they speak Scots, and that actually makes them multilingual in Scotland if they can speak Scots and English. Fascinating topic, and I don't think this is one that has been settled yet, definitely, but it is one that we need to kind of be proud about in Scotland, and all power to those on social media that I mentioned earlier who are actually making strides forward to really popularise Scots and make people proud of the fact that they can speak a pretty special language that is culturally significant right here in Scotland. But like I said, we've got a month of lockdown here in Scotland, so who knows what other types of sit-down content I will be making over the next while. But nonetheless, great to speak to you. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider signing up to my Patreon. The link is down below as well. All contributions help to go towards my content and my camera equipment and all the rest of it. And guys, don't forget to follow me on some of my other social media accounts as well. I'd love to talk to you over there too. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and all the rest of it, right? All the links will be down below. Make sure you read the description of this video for all the information that you'll need. But thanks for watching, and until the next time, I hope you have a good night, morning, evening, afternoon, or whatever time of day it is wherever you are in the world. Take care.